Hello and welcome to Life Reviewed Movies. This is episode 9 and part 9 of my Planet of the Apes retrospective. And here we are at last, the final film in the franchise, at least for now. It brings us to War for the Planet of the Apes from 2017, directed by Matt Reeves and written by Mark Baumbach and Matt Reeves. It stars Andy Serkis as Caesar, Woody Harrelson as the Colonel, Steve Zahn as Bad Ape, Karen Knovel as Maurice, Amia Miller as Nova, Terry Notary as Rocket, and Michael Adam Twait as Luca. And, this film is still in theaters. We're going to go over the plot, so if you haven't seen it, know that these reviews will contain spoilers. But let's go into the plot. And this is a pretty long one, but there's a lot to talk about. So, sometime after the U.S. military was called to fight off an increasingly intelligent and dangerous tribe of apes, the ape clan, led by the chimpanzee Caesar, are attacked in the woods by a rogue paramilitary faction known as Alpha Omega, led by a ruthless colonel. Alpha Omega also has in its service apes they call donkeys that had previously followed Koba, a human-hating bonobo who had led a failed coup against Caesar. During the attack, the Alpha Omega militants are met by heavy ape resistance, and several soldiers, including the gorilla Red, are captured by the apes. Caesar arrives and orders the 4 human soldiers to be released, with a message to the colonel that he did not start the war, and that he desires peace between the humans and apes. Caesar orders that Red is to be imprisoned for his crimes, but before he can be imprisoned, Red escapes, injuring an albino gorilla named Winter. Soon after, Caesar's son Blue Eyes and his lieutenant Rocket return from a journey to find a safe haven for the apes. They report that they have found a place across the desert that is perfect for the clan. Winter, still frightened from the soldiers' attack, wants to leave immediately, but Caesar does not think they're prepared to leave so soon. That night, a group of Alpha Omega soldiers led by the colonel infiltrate the apes' home behind a waterfall, and the colonel kills Caesar's wife Cornelia and Blue Eyes, his son. Winter cannot be found, and Luca, a gorilla, believes that Winter has betrayed them because he was frightened. Leaving the younger son, Cornelius, in the care of Blue Eyes' mate, Lake, Caesar departs to exact revenge on the colonel for the death of his family. He's accompanied by Maurice, an orangutan, and Caesar's advisor, Luca, and Rocket, while the other apes head for the desert. During their journey, the apes encounter a soldier living in an abandoned village, and Caesar shoots him when he reaches for his rifle. Caesar, Maurice, Luca, and Rocket search the dead soldier's home. Maurice discovers the soldier's daughter, who is apparently unable to speak. Maurice befriends the girl, giving her a small rag doll, and insists that they take her with them. Along the way, Caesar's party encounters Winter in an Alpha Omega camp on the beach, where he's volunteered to become a donkey for the soldiers in return for them sparing his life. He tells Caesar's group that the colonel has departed for a location referred to as the border. Winter tries to call out to the Alpha Omega soldiers to save him, but Caesar and the others smother him to keep him quiet, killing him. Caesar begins to worry that he's becoming like Koba by killing apes and seeking revenge. While following the soldiers to the border, they discover some soldiers who've been shot and left for dead. Their examination of a soldier who survived reveals that he, like the girl, cannot speak. Later, the group meets Bad Ape, an intelligent chimpanzee hermit who lived in the Sierra Zoo before the simian flu pandemic. Bad Ape reveals that the human soldiers are encamped at the border and hesitantly agrees to lead them there. When the group arrives at the border, they see hundreds of apes held captive inside a former quarantine facility. While getting a closer look, Luca is killed protecting Caesar from an Alpha Omega patrol, angering Caesar and causing him to proceed alone. Caesar discovers the rest of his ape clan has been captured and are being forced to build a wall with no food or water. He is captured by Red. The colonel reveals to Caesar that the simian flu virus has mutated and now causes humans who survived the original strain to devolve, becoming mute and regressing back to a primitive state. Caesar deduces that the colonel is barricading himself in the facility to fend off the remnants of the U.S. Army from the north who are coming to execute him because he favors killing any infected humans, including his own son, to stop the spread of the virus. Caesar is commended by the colonel for his intelligence, and the colonel explains that he is fighting a holy war for the survival of mankind. While Caesar is tortured with starvation, the mute girl, whom Maurice names Nova, sneaks into the facility to give Caesar food, water, and her rag doll that was given to her by Maurice. To prevent her from being discovered, Rocket allows himself to be captured as a diversion. The next day, the colonel comes to see if Caesar is still alive, discovers the doll, and asks both Caesar and Preacher how the doll got inside the cell. The colonel decides to take the doll. Together, Caesar and Rocket are able to work out a means of escape via an underground tunnel that leads out of the facility. Maurice and Bad Ape use the tunnel to rescue the apes, and Caesar orders the others to escape while he goes to confront the colonel. As the facility comes under attack by the Northern Army, Caesar reaches the colonel but realizes he has fallen victim to the virus he has feared and has become unable to speak. As Caesar is about to kill the colonel, he sees the mute girl's rag doll on the ground. Caesar puts down his gun and spares the colonel, who then uses it to kill himself. During the battle between Alpha Omega and the Northern Army, the escaping apes come under fire from Alpha Omega. Caesar attempts to attack Alpha Omega from behind but is shot with a crossbow by Preacher, one of the Alpha Omega militants he had previously set free. Red saves Caesar's life by killing Preacher with a grenade launcher and is executed by an Alpha Omega superior as a result. Caesar blows up the facility's fuel supplies, causing a cascading explosion which wipes out Alpha Omega and allows the Northern Army to win the battle. However, the army is subsequently buried and devastated by an avalanche, which Caesar and the other apes, carrying Nova, survive by climbing nearby trees. The remaining apes depart the facility and cross the desert to find an oasis. While the other apes joyously celebrate their new home, Maurice discovers Caesar's wound. Maurice then speaks, telling Caesar that Cornelius will know what his father believed in and did to protect the apes. Caesar slowly and silently succumbs to his wound, and Maurice mourns his passing, watching over the other apes. So there you have it. Not that much going on, but there's a lot of kind of subtle elements between the apes and important details that are in that plot description. So let's go back to the beginning. I read that Matt Reeves and the writer Mark Bomback they had more time on this one than on Dawn. And so they just watched tons and tons of films. Empire Strikes Back, Apocalypse Now, Bridge over the River Kwai, and all the Planet of the Apes films. And they said they had kind of a unique vision to make a blockbuster film that, everybody should be making. And all these people, you have all these money, all this money, all this time, you can kind of do whatever you want. And it seems like people, other directors or studios get involved or whatever, and they screw it up. And that's why you don't have, trilogies that are like almost flawless start to finish, or that get better and better each film, which you would think would be more common, but it really isn't. War for the Planet of the Apes is not that film. It is bigger. It is more intense. It is a beautiful finale to this modern trilogy of films. And while I still feel like Dawn is personally the one that I'll watch the most because of Koba, there's a lot of argument for this being the best of the trilogy, and maybe the best film period in the franchise. Like I said, Dawn is my personal favorite, but this is pretty close to being second or third right after the original. So let's start at the beginning. The war movies that they watched obviously had a big influence on the opening scenes. You see a small blurb about the plot of Rise and the plot of Dawn, and then the title for War of the Planet of the Apes, or War for the Planet of the Apes, while you see the back of these soldiers' helmets, and they all have Monkey Killer and all these other things written on their helmets, and the apes that are working for the humans or working with the humans have donkey spray painted on their backs, which is super degrading, and it's just it really makes you feel for these apes that they followed Koba, then they had nowhere to turn to, so they turned to humans, and now they're being treated like pack mules, basically. And so, yeah, the start of this movie, there's an awesome battle in the beginning of this movie that's like super freaky, and the apes rally together and charge the humans, and there's a ton of casualties. And then they bring in, Red, who's the gorilla who, was a donkey, and a few other humans, and Caesar comes out, and they're like, we can't even believe you're real or that you still exist. Caesar's sort of like a legend out in the woods, which is awesome. and I think exactly how it should be. And he sends the humans back. He still has that empathy. He doesn't want a war with humans. He says, "Tell the colonel, I just want to live in peace." And he says, "No, we're going to capture Red, who's a traitor." And then Red escapes, wounding Winter. But what we find out is that Red actually, they actually made a deal with Winter that they would spare his life if he helped them basically betray Caesar. And so that night, Winter's like, "We need to leave. Like, we need to get out of here." And Caesar's like, "We can't leave right now. We're not ready." But Winter knows that they're actually coming that night. And so they infiltrate. They come down in these night vision goggles, and they kind of, they climb down and through the waterfall in the dark. And, Caesar's got some people on patrol, but then it breaks into this really intense, scene with them fighting the soldiers and the colonel killing, thinking that Blue Eyes is Caesar. He kills Blue Eyes and kills Cornelia. And it's the rage on Caesar's face when he discovers this. And then he leaps onto, the rope with the colonel, and they fight, and then, Caesar falls down into the waterfall. But this is emotional stuff. So this is hitting on, we saw Caesar's son die in battle for the Planet of the Apes. And, it didn't have the emotional resonance that you're getting with this modern franchise. The humanization of the apes is so incredible, and the emotion, there's nothing else anyone can say about Andy Serkis's performance in the motion capture in these films. It is second to none. It is absolutely some of the best motion capture performance ever as Caesar, even better than his Gollum performance, which would be probably the second. This is like really deep stuff. And then Caesar sends them on their way, sends his baby Cornelius off with Lake, who was Blue Eye's wife, and says, lead them across the desert. I'm going to go off on this revenge mission. And it's a quieter film because of that. It's, Caesar's going to go off by himself, and then Luca, Maurice, and Rocket are like, "We're coming with you." And it's cool because it ends up being one gorilla, one orangutan, and then, Caesar and one chimpanzee that follow him. But, one from each kind of faction follow Caesar. These are people who've been with him from the beginning. I know Luca's in the second film. I don't know if by name, but he definitely is one of the gorillas. I don't know if he's the one who's like the guard at the gate or not, but Luca was in Dawn, and Maurice and Rocket have been with him from the beginning. And so it's nice to see them all go off together, and it's this quieter, slower paced story where they go to this farm, and then he has to kill, he kills the guy with the gun. They find Nova, and there's just this connection between Maurice and Nova right away, and then between Nova and Luca, where, she gives him the flower, and obviously Nova is a callback to the original films. The original Nova, who couldn't speak, and that itself is a really interesting callback to the original films. That was never really addressed, how they devolved, and I think it's really interesting the way that they kind of set up this universe, right up until that first film, sort of prepping for the environment you would see in that first film, where humans can't talk and they've all devolved, and apes are really advanced to sort of switch places. And so all the stuff with Nova is great. Caesar is sick of humans at this point. Caesar has given humans enough chances, and it hasn't worked out for him. So Caesar doesn't want anything to do with Nova, but Maurice and then Luca really form a connection with her, and then eventually Caesar does as well. So another callback is the Alpha Omega. The Alpha Omega was the name of the bomb that we saw in both beneath the Planet of the Apes and battle for the Planet of the Apes. So that's a callback to that was the name of the bomb that they were worshiping. And so they really, have taken the original franchise into consideration when crafting this one, even though it's very, very different in tone and style. So then we see Caesar. They actually find Winter, and there's this, scene where they kind of jump him and they ask him for information, and then he tries to struggle, and so Caesar basically chokes him out and kills him. And then he starts to see these visions of Koba, all bloody, you know, coming to talk to him and sort of like, look, you're becoming me, which is a perfect way to approach it. I was afraid that they wouldn't, they would just jump ahead and Koba would be long forgotten and that they wouldn't reference him, but he comes up quite a bit. He's referenced multiple times, and he makes a few appearances as well. Always only to Caesar in these visions, always bloody and just kind of like taunting him. And Caesar's seeing so much of Koba in himself. And so Woody Harrelson's character, the Colonel, is very reminiscent to like a Marlon Brando Apocalypse Now type character. There's they don't even try to hide the fact. I think there's some graffiti that says Apocalypse Now on the wall at some point. They're really going for this Vietnam vibe in this film. And his character's gone completely mad. His son got this virus, was unable to speak, and he killed his son, and that sort of was the breaking point. The Northern Army is like, we can't just start killing everyone who can't speak, and the Colonel is like, no, we need to eradicate anybody who can't speak. We're going to devolve. The apes are going to take over if we don't do this. And so, him and Caesar have sort of a mutual respect when he captures him later in the film, in a couple of conversations about it. Before that, though, they run into Bad Ape, who's a very different character than we've had in any of these movies. He was in a zoo. He became intelligent. He obviously, got exposed to the virus, became intelligent, and he just went off to live by himself like a hermit up in this, abandoned place. And he's very odd. He adds a little bit of like comedic, relief. And, it's nothing over the top. I was afraid that he was going to be really slapsticky. He falls over a couple times and says some dumb stuff, but he's kind of meant to be more like this, like, child. He feels more like a child, just like Nova, and they kind of balance each other out. Finally, they get to the facility that they heard about where the Colonel is, and they've captured all of Caesar's clan. All the apes are there, and the Alpha Omega, like a couple of troopers, like jump them, and Luca protects Caesar and is killed, and Caesar can't take it anymore. He's like, "You guys leave. I'm going down there. Like, you guys get out of here. I'm gonna go down there," and he ends up captured himself. That's when he starts to build a relationship, so to speak, with the Colonel, and the Colonel puts Caesar in his own cage and basically tortures him because he won't lead the apes to do the Colonel's bidding. And that's when Nova sneaks in at night and gives him some food and water because he's basically starving and gonna die. He hasn't eaten anything. Gives him some food, helps get some food and water, and then gives him the doll. The Colonel discovers the doll in the morning, and the doll is what's carrying the virus that the Colonel eventually gets, because the Colonel, takes the doll, and Caesar sees it at the end of the movie, and that's what basically the reason the Colonel becomes infected. Rocket is really awesome in this film, and he comes in to kind of distract from the whole Nova situation. He's captured, and then right away he's like, "Are you ready to devise a plan?" And him and Caesar put together a plan. They, with Maurice working from the outside, they get all the apes through, and there's this big like prison escape third act where they're all just trying to get out of this facility before this other army arrives, and a huge battle ensues. Eventually, the Northern Army does show up with tanks and all this kind of stuff, and all the apes have escaped out, but Caesar's still in there. He goes to the colonel. He sees that the colonel has the virus, and basically, takes pity on him, doesn't shoot him, but leaves him the gun, and obviously he kills himself. Then Caesar's actually shot by this preacher character who keeps kind of popping up. He's one of the original guys that Caesar spared in the beginning. And then Red, that gorilla, finally realizes he's betrayed Caesar all this time, and fires a rocket at Preacher, killing him. He's executed by one of the guys at the top, and then sort of in the middle of this battle, Caesar figures out, even though he's wounded, finds a way to blow up the whole facility. Alpha Omega's dead. The Northern Army's charging forward. The apes are kind of running into the woods, and the avalanche comes down, and Caesar just barely makes it into a tree with all the other apes and Nova to kind of escape the avalanche. They cross the desert, and they finally get to their spot, and we're looking at a place that's very similar to where the apes colonized in outside the desert, being the Forbidden Zone in the original film, and they've sort of colonized that area by the lake and all that. This is sort of a similar looking place. And we don't know exactly where it is, and landscapes and all these movies have changed because of fallout and nuclear destruction and all this different stuff. So much has changed the landscape, so we don't really know where we are exactly. But the movie ends with a beautiful moment. Maurice finally speaks to Caesar, and they have this exchange, and your son will know what you believed in. And then Caesar dies, and it sort of just shows the apes happy by the lake, and kind of shows the sun setting or rising or whatever, and it ends. This is how you finish a trilogy. If they never make another Planet of the Apes film, they ended it on a perfect note. Sort of my combined opinion of this new trilogy is that it might be the best, like minute for minute trilogy of all time. You very rarely you will see three movies that graduate in intensity and emotion and just visual style all at the same time. And these films, each film gets bigger and better. So that being said, I think War for the Planet of the Apes is another 10 out of 10 film. One of my favorite films of this year so far, by absolutely without question. And if this is the last film, like I said, they've done a great job. That being said, this movie sort of, for reasons I have no idea, I guess it's just this, summer, people are, not going to see, it's not going to see films this summer, but it's not making anywhere near as much money as even Dawn made a few years ago. And so, they may not make another film, but I know there was talks and plans of possibly making a fourth film in the new Planet of the Apes saga, which would be the 10th film overall. And obviously it would be most likely a remake of the original film, because we've really reached that point in the timeline that they would want to remake that movie. Now, I think that what would be a fantastic part of that, I think there's an opportunity to make a movie with Cornelius sort of growing up and, them having war against another faction of apes, which I think would be really, I think that's the direction they should go. And, I can already see it now. At the end of Dawn, we had this, this sort of teaser where Koba may be alive, and they specifically wanted to leave that open. I think if there was this really, outrageous group of apes, warlike apes that were living in a different area that had maybe not part of Caesar's group, that, ended up wanting to come take over, Caesar's land, and, we find out, into the film that they're being led by a, blind and really, battle, wounded, and disabled Koba. I think that would be just absolutely the coolest plot they could do. So, but they have some options. They could really just go back and remake the original film with Taylor or showing up with his ship and all this kind of stuff. So they have some options, and I'll be happy either way. I would love to see them keep making films, but if they don't, they ended on such a strong note. So this has been my Planet of the Apes film retrospective. Now, there is a lot of other content out there, a couple of novels, both a prequel to this film and a prequel to Dawn, that I want to review. There are some really cool comic crossovers, and there's a King Kong Planet of the Apes comic crossover coming out early next year. And but most importantly, there are TV shows. So there's a live-action TV show and an animated TV show. And there's some dispute of where they fit into the original Planet of the Apes timeline. But I've watched some of it, and I have to say I'm pleasantly surprised. So watching the TV show, I think that the episodes themselves, at least the live-action show, really merit individual reviews. So I'd like to go from where do I go from here? I think I'm going to be going through each individual episode of the live-action TV show and sort of giving my opinion on those. Probably not as long as these because they're 45-minute, 50-minute episodes. And then tackle the animated show, whether I tackle it in a few parts or episode by episode or just in one big lump sum, that remains to be seen. But thank you for joining me on Life Reviewed Movies. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll have a lot more content coming to you soon.